It was a peaceful evening. The sun was just beginning to set behind the hills, casting a warm, golden glow over our quiet neighborhood. I stood in the kitchen, my hands moving automatically as I prepared dinner, while the soft hum of the radio played in the background. My son, Alex, had just come home from college for the weekend, and his presence brought a comforting, almost nostalgic, energy to the house. There was something so familiar about it, the kind of peacefulness that comes from the comforting routine of family. Alex had grown up so quickly. It felt like just yesterday that he was a little boy, trailing behind me wherever I went, asking questions about every little thing that crossed his curious mind. Now, at 21, he was no longer that curious little boy. He had become a young man, confident, strong, and at times unknowingly distant. It was a strange, bittersweet feeling for me. The dynamic between us had shifted as he matured, and it was something that I was still learning to adapt to. I felt pride in who he had become, but there was also a part of me that missed the little boy who once thought I held all the answers to his questions. The sun dipped further behind the hills, and the soft glow in the kitchen took on a warmer hue. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the living room. As we sat down at the table, I couldn't help but notice the way he looked at me, thoughtful, almost intense. It made me pause for a moment. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just my imagination. We talked about his classes, his friends, and how much he missed being home. But the way his eyes lingered on mine for longer than usual made me feel a strange sense of something I couldn't quite define. There was something unspoken between us, an unspoken feeling that seemed to hang in the air. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to do all the time before he left for college. The living room felt cozier than usual, with the dim lighting and the softness of the cushions creating the perfect setting for a quiet night in. I couldn't remember the last time we'd shared such a peaceful evening. As the movie played, I found myself glancing at him more than I should have, noticing how much he had grown into himself. He was no longer the child I had raised. He was a man now, and it struck me just how much time had passed since those simpler days. I found myself feeling a strange mix of emotions: pride, nostalgia, and a sense of yearning for the past. It was a mother's love, but it was also a recognition of how much things had changed. The child who had once held my hand, asking endless questions, was now a young man with his own dreams, his own future. And while I loved him just as deeply as I always had, I realized that our relationship had shifted. He was finding his place in the world, and I needed to let him do that, even if it meant letting go a little bit. Just as I was beginning to feel overwhelmed by my thoughts, Alex shifted closer to me on the couch. At first, I thought it was an innocent gesture, but as he leaned in and rested his head on my shoulder, I felt a rush of warmth, a warmth that made me realize just how much I had missed him. It was a simple, affectionate gesture, but it spoke volumes. I reached up and gently ran my fingers through his hair, the way I used to when he was a little boy. He smiled, a sleepy, contented smile, and I felt my heart swell with love. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head and smiled. "Nothing, sweetheart," I replied. "I'm just happy you're home. I've missed you." He smiled, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, there was nothing but love between us. It was pure, unconditional, and it reminded me that no matter how much things changed, the bond between us would always remain. We sat there in silence, the movie playing in the background, but neither of us was paying attention anymore. It was enough just to be together, to feel that closeness that we had once taken for granted. As the movie came to an end, I got up, feeling a sense of gratitude for the evening we had shared. I hoped that we could have more moments like this, moments that were simple, but full of love. I knew that Alex was growing up, becoming more independent. but I also knew that he would always be my little boy, no matter how old he got. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed, a sense of peace still lingering from the night before. The events of the previous evening were still on my mind, but they felt comforting, almost like a warm hug. I made my way downstairs, and there was Alex, already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand. "Morning, Mom," he said with a smile, his voice casual and easy. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, returning his smile. "I was thinking of making pancakes for breakfast. How does that sound?" "Perfect," he said, his eyes lighting up at the thought. As I began preparing breakfast, he mentioned that he wanted to go for a hike later and asked if I would like to join him. It had been a long time since we had done anything like that together, and I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go. But then I reminded myself that it was just a mother and son spending time together, something that I had missed dearly. "Sure," I said, smiling at him. "That sounds nice." Later that afternoon, we drove to a nearby trail, a place we had gone many times when he was younger. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. We walked side by side, talking about nothing in particular, old memories, his plans for the future, the usual small talk. I found myself laughing, feeling more at ease with him, thinking that maybe I had overreacted the night before. As we walked further along the trail, there were moments when our conversation would pause, leaving a lingering silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when you are truly comfortable with someone, when words aren't always necessary to fill the space between you. At one point, we reached a clearing with a beautiful view of the valley below. Alex stopped walking and turned to me. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he said, his voice soft but serious. "I don't know what I'd do without you." There was something about the way he said it that caught me off guard, a vulnerability in his tone that made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you won't have to worry about that anytime soon," I joked. "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't laugh. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "No, I mean it," he continued. "You've always been more than just my mom. You've been my everything." I froze, the words hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. I wasn't quite sure how to respond. I searched his face for some sign that he was just being sentimental, that this was just an innocent moment of affection. But there was something in his eyes that made me realize just how deeply he felt. "Alex," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know how much I love you, right?" "Of course," he replied, stepping even closer. "I love you too, more than you realize." My pulse quickened, not out of discomfort, but out of a deep sense of connection. This wasn't how I had imagined our relationship evolving, but it was clear that our bond had only grown stronger with time. It was a love that transcended the typical boundaries, a love that was built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. I reached out and pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "I love you too, sweetheart," I whispered. "Always." We stood there for a moment, just holding each other, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The line between mother and son hadn't blurred. It had simply deepened into something more meaningful. Our bond was built on years of love and understanding, and it was stronger than ever. "I think we should head back," I said after a while, my voice gentle. "It's getting late." He nodded, and we turned to make our way back down the trail. As we walked, I realized that I didn't need to worry about the changes in our relationship. Yes, Alex was growing up, and yes, our dynamic was shifting. But that didn't mean we were losing each other. If anything, it meant that our bond was evolving into something even stronger. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the day we had shared. I knew that there would be more changes to come, more moments where I would have to let go a little bit more. But I also knew that no matter what, Alex would always be my son, and I would always be his mother. And that was enough. The next morning, Alex was up early again, already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He greeted me with a smile, and I felt my heart swell with love for him. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful. "I was thinking of making us some coffee. Want a cup?" "Of course," I replied, smiling back at him.